Okay, sorry about that minor glitch, but we're all good. Can you hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you again.
Okay. Attempt 2. So where are you based? I should have asked you that.
I'm in Sydney.
Ah.
Just 25k northwest of the city centre.
Is it a good day down there today?
It's always a good day. But it looks like it's sunny outside, so that'll be good.
Still cold up here. Alrighty. So I'll just intro you at the start and then we'll jump into it. So we are going live as we speak. Okie dokie. So massive hello. We are live now through Facebook. So let me say a big hi to those of you who are joining us on the Facebook Live. And you might be just in between speakers like we were a minute ago and going to get yourself a cup of tea to settle down to listen to hear what Clive has to share with us. And this morning, it is my pleasure to formally introduce you. Also, sorry, I almost forgot to say hello to everyone on Zoom. So hello to everyone on Zoom as well. Wherever you're coming in from, wherever you're beaming in from, whatever planet you're on, you are very welcome in this conversation. We are getting all sorts of people, Clive, so it's all good. So a massive welcome to Clive Smallman this morning. His topic is called Superhumanism Defined, the World of Positive Deviancy. Now, if you're like me, you want to know more about exactly what positive deviancy means, because it almost sounds like an oxymoron. And that's my bet that it was your intent to sound like that behind the title. Not that I've met you before, but that was my bet.
You're spot on.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So Clive's going to share his wisdom on this topic and really diving into the things that make successful people successful through his observations. So we are very much looking forward to your topic. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Clive. It's all yours.
Well, good morning. I'll just share my screen if I can find the right one. Desktop 3, that's the one we want. Okay, and share that. I hope everybody can see that. Is that clear? Just if you put your hands up, that'd be useful.
That's perfect. So people may or may not know how to put their hands up. So you just click a little hand. That means you're putting your hand up. It looks great. We're getting people saying, yep, excellent.
Oh, that's the idea. That's fantastic. Well, enough photographs of me. Let's get into it. So here we go. There we go. So Matt Church, Thought Leaders Business School, tells us we're in the decade of disruption, and then along came the singularity. There's no doubt what the singularity is. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, or also known as COVID-19. That's the thing that kind of is occupying far too much news time just at the moment, and documentaries. We've seen global recessions before. We've seen health crises before, but we haven't seen anything on this scale for a long time. The last time was 1918, when anything of a health crisis was on this scale. Now, the conventional economy, I think, will recover. There's debate what shape it's going to follow. I don't think it really matters. People talk about V shapes, U shapes, whatever shape. I think it's going to be a K shape. Why do I think it's going to be a K shape? That's quite simple. The K is the drop in the economic, the leg is the drop in the economic performance.
Mm-hmm.
The lower leg that goes off down there, or down there, depending on which way you're looking at it, that's some organisations will fail, some people will become ill, as we know, and some businesses will fail. Their performance will drop off. Some businesses will go up the upper leg, so they'll actually recover, and that's what they call the V curve. Most of those will be manufacturing businesses that recover like that. Unfortunately, there's something people haven't noticed. This is that service lags manufacturing behind. So we've got a big gap in the middle between as manufacturing recovers and as service recovers. As we know, big issues in the service. The length of time we spend on that leg of that U underneath it's not just up to investors, it's not just up to businesses, it's not just up to governments, it's up to all of us. We can't rely solely on politicians, we can't rely on conventional business leadership. The scale's just too big with what we're going into. We've got to get outside the box. I'm going to use a lot of cliches this morning, I don't apologise for that. But we've got to get outside the box big style and find new solutions based on uncommon practices and behaviours or outliers to positively change behaviours processes. That's what positive deviancy is. Positive deviancy is about using uncommon practices and uncommon behaviours to provoke solutions to wicked problems. And we have got some wicked problems coming up.
Do you want to, before you go any further, just define a wicked problem for people? Because some people have heard that terminology and are familiar with it, and others are not.
Cool. Wicked problems is actually a phrase that's created by an economist called Herbert Simon in the 1950s. It's part of his Nobel Prize winning research on what's called satisficing when you make decisions. I'm not going to get into that. But the basic idea is that these are problems that somebody finds extremely difficult to solve. It looks as though it's almost impossible to solve the problem, but then somebody comes along and finds a solution to it. So it's something that is extremely challenging and resists conventional wisdom. So something that doesn't have a simple solution. That's what a wicked problem is. It is what it says it is. It's wicked. A wicked how do we fly to Mars? I was watching a program on Mars last night. There are so many problems within the idea of flying to Mars. It's a whole wicked problem. I think we've got a set of wicked problems that we've got to deal with here because of the way the world economy is set up. And that the world economy is so interconnected. There's so many things that are tied up together and around that the ripple effects in different countries affect different countries and so many people. So that's what that's the definition of
beautiful
wicked problem. So the idea is that you need collective intelligence to actually solve those types of problems. Normal isn't going to lead to a new normal. What we need is extraordinary, positively deviant behaviour. And I'll embellish that some more. But my favourite quote to sum this up is actually from Star Trek. Yes, I'm a recovering Trekkie. It's from the Doctor, Bones McCoy, as he was called, and that it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. I think that's where we're heading just at the moment. So this idea is that we're flattening the curve, but how do we narrow the U that service is and make the V a lot quicker? Sticking our heads in the sand isn't going to work, that's quite clear. And sticking our heads above the parapet, as you see here, is extremely risky, but we're going to have to do elements of that. What we've got to get is the right balance between preserving what we have managed to preserve now and readying ourselves and other people to break through, shortening what I've called in previous webinars I've done on this subject, the critical curve. And that is where superhumanism comes in. We've really got to get the best of human power to actually break through some of these problems. A very old quotation from Aristotle, we become just by performing just actions. temperate by performing temperate actions, and brave by performing brave actions. A lot of us are going to have to become brave. If we're not already brave, we're going to have to become brave very quickly, because this is huge. I can say that. Why do I think that's huge? I think it's huge because I've spent 30 years looking at risk and crisis management in different guises. I have turned around a couple of enterprises from crisis. I've looked at major accidents and the progenitors of accidents, and I've also looked at a health crisis in the UK and gave some advice on that. And I've worked with a very large corporate, Coca-Cola, recently looking at crisis management and teams. The big move for me, and why I changed my attitude to how we look at this, was working with Dr. Susie Green at the Positivity Institute. And when I learned about positive psychology from her, which led me to positive leadership, positive organisation studies, and the work of Kim Cameron, and then on to positive deviancy from there. And I'll explain some of those links in just a moment. So I've been looking at this for around about 10 years now, is what I've been working on. And yes, I'm with Jack. I did try being normal once. It was the worst 2 minutes of my life, so I gave that idea up, basically, because it doesn't work for me. There are about 3 core problems we've got and what we need solutions for. People are under stress, pressure and challenge hugely. I know that from conversations I have with people and other people that I've talked to. Businesses and public organisations, sector organisations, are under pressure and challenged as well. And the scale of getting back towards the new normal is huge. That's what people are working with. And my talk about head in the sand and head above the parapet comes from the work of the Harvard Business School. When they looked back at recessions in the 1980s and in the noughties, they looked at 4,700 companies and they said, what did they do and how did they cope? What they found was that being purely defensive, head in the sand, sandy eyeball syndrome, as a friend of mine calls it, that's going to fail. There's no question that that is going to fail. Also being overly offensive, really going for marketing, selling hard, is also going to fail. Not surprisingly, what Harvard found was that what you need is a defensive and offensive approach together. But even better is if you can really tune in and get the very best solutions, get some fresh thinking around offense. That is what's going to be best for all of us. Negative positioning really won't help us. It'll bring physiological and psychological illness. We know that, but I'm not just talking about the physiological illness from COVID. I'm talking about other illness as well. Trying to get to normality is pointless because normal's shifted. In the last 3 months, normal has shifted and it's going to shift some more. We've got to get back above that curve and there's a strong association between positive behaviours and well-being, and also in organisations, there's a proven association with high performance and resilience, and that comes out of the work of Cameron and others. So these are the things that we need to address.
Can I just take you back 2 steps, Clive? You mentioned something about how important it was for us to be able to get useful information from the right places and new information, new insight.
Yeah.
How do people do that in a world that is literally oversaturated with information?
That's a key point. The place the place I go to first is trusted advisors and trusted mentors, and I try and find out what they're thinking. So I will speak, in my case, my mentors in one of my Tribe Thought Leaders Business School is Chris Freeman. And I've spoken with Chris a number of occasions and to see what he thinks. I go back to, I have a sales mentor who I work with, a guy called Steve Brosman. I will ask him his opinion on things, and then I will talk to people I trust. Then I go to sources that are trustworthy. I don't go to the fake news merchants. I don't use Facebook. I use a little bit of LinkedIn, but I go to really strong news reporting from both sides of the spectrum. I'll go to The Economist is usually my source. Now they're right of centre, but they're quite sensible in their reporting. The same, The Guardian. So it's really going to those those channels and sources that stand out. The ABC in Australia is one, the BBC in the UK is another. There are other sources, which I'm not going to name for obvious reasons, which are perhaps have got a much more political bent in what they're trying to do. So you've got to go to the sources that are notably trustworthy and listen to the scientists as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that is making sure that you understand the political imperative of the source, but also that you understand the funding arrangements of the source, because
that's right. So you've got to be
that's where you can get in trouble, where on the face of things you feel like, yeah, this is a trustworthy source, like source X. They must be very trustworthy. And you dig in and you find out who the majority shareholder is of source X. And then suddenly you realize it's actually not going to be that trustworthy after all, because this is the point I just wanted to bring out through what you're saying.
No, surely. I mean, I was looking at the shape of the curve this morning, and I went looking for some information, and I found a source, which I'm not going to name, which is a credible source. But then you look at it and you think, hang on a minute, let's just take a step back. Where does their funding come from? So you've got to be careful and take out, you have to take out some of the hyperbole out of sources like that. There is a core of a good idea in there, and that was to do with the shape of the curve. But some of the overstatement of what you could do to amend that curve is what you need to suspend. So that you're quite right. It's you've got to read roundly. It's the best example of how to do it I know is the work on scenario planning from guys like Peter Schwartz, who say you've got to read widely and then make your own mind up where it comes from and look for alternative sources, alternative. That's why this conference, and I'm not going to spare you blushes, that's why this conference is such a good idea, because we're not all going to agree with all of the ideas in the conference.
No, and that's the whole point.
Exactly. And that's the point of it. But there should be ideas. I mean, half of the people who are listening might say, no, I don't agree with him on that. That's fine. That's how it should be. But if it just stimulates thinking, which we're going to talk about in a moment, then that's what we want. That's what I want. I want alternative thinking based on data and based on other people's thinking. Carefully thought about, carefully selected, carefully thought through.
Great. Someone's got a question for you about the wicked problems, in regard to wicked problems. When we solve the issue against the conventional way, how do we take this forward? That's the question.
The answer to that is ask people like the Wright brothers, ask people like James Dyson. It's grit and determination, unfortunately. Is what that makes impossible. Rise above. It is very difficult, but I think at the moment, business in general it wants to listen for ideas. I've been speaking with some deeply conventional businessmen over the last month, and they are ripe for new thinking. So it's getting it into the right audiences, but it's just that you've just got to keep pushing. And pushing and pushing and pushing. The audiences that I speak to vary in size. To me, it doesn't matter if I get one person who understands what I'm saying and it helps them, that's fine. So that's what you've got. You've just got to keep pushing, communicating effectively, and be relentless in the way that you approach it.
Beautiful. Thanks.
So let's just I'll just regain my track and say that what you said earlier was interesting, and that is that there is a problem with the words positively deviant. You said right at the beginning, it sounds like an oxymoron, and I have been called worse things over the years. It's conventional established corporates, a lot of them don't like out of the box thinking. Some of them do, and I'll come to an example of that later on. Certainly established political parties don't like anything that disturbs their cosy duopolies, and that's of all stripes. I'm not making a political point there. It's only really new, bright thinking corporations, entrepreneurs and communities who welcome divergent thinkers. They don't, as the metaphor here illustrates, they don't like strange. Strange is not something they enjoy. a lot of people like normal. That's what they want to see. And that's simply because their perception is absolutely everything to them. And the double difficulty we've got at the moment with this type of thinking is we're going through an enormous period of huge change. So people are going to react differently to even more change on top of change on top of change. The thing is that where positive deviancy comes from, which I'll explain in a moment, it actually suggests revolution. Actually, nothing can be further from the truth. It's actually about making the very best of what you've already got to a certain extent. It's just a different orientation on what you've already got. In other words, deviance is in the eye of the beholder. That's the point of it. Where do I come from? Where does my model come from? My model comes from a lot of thinking in a lot of different spaces over the years. I mentioned wiki problems earlier. That was, I think, the first person to really nail that is Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize-winning economist from many years ago. A polymath who worked in economics, human behavior, organization science, and artificial intelligence. All of those fields quite complex. And his answer to solving wicked problems is what he called requisite variety in problem solving. What did he mean by that? What he meant by that is get lots of different points of view in the room to solve a problem. If it's a particularly difficult problem, it's no good having, for example, just a set of engineers in the room. You might want somebody who's an artist in the room with you. You might want somebody who's an economist in the room with you. It's bringing an interesting set of people to solve problems. That was Herbert's argument. The people who gave us the term positive deviancy were these three people here: Richard Pascali, professor at Stanford, Jerry Sterning, unfortunately no longer with us, and Monique Sterning, his wife, who were both public health professionals. Jerry was a doctor and Monique is a trained nurse, I think, in that space. And what they used this idea of positive deviancy to do was to get communities in developing countries to solve their own health problems. So that's basically what they did. So we go from public health to organizational scholarship to positive psychology and on to cutting edge in business and politics. One of my other big influences increasingly is Kim Cameron, who looks at positive leadership and positive organizational scholarship from University of Michigan. And also in the same mold, William Seidman, Michael Macaulay took the ideas from Pascali, Sterning and put it into business. You've got Gunter Pauli, who helped create this idea of the blue economy, where we get community solutions to sustainability issues. They've implemented 200 projects over 20 years. They've got $4 billion US invested in those projects, and they've created 3 million jobs. That to me sounds like, if you'll forgive the pun, a blueprint for something very good. Another influence of mine is Christopher Peterson, Martin Seligman in positive psychology. You can go and look at them up. And also Chan Kim and Rennie Morborn in Blue Ocean Strategy, a very different view on strategy. And goodness knows we leaded it after 20 years of straight thinking about strategy. Most recently, Bjarke Ingels from the Big Group, an architect, who basically his approach to building things is yes is more. The power of the positive yes is what he's arguing for. And then, and love him or hate him, dear old Tony Robbins. Yeah, everybody's got a view on Tony, but one thing I like about Tony, he says, if you've got a big problem or you really want to solve something, you have to take massive action. That's what we need. We need to have, people have got to push back. To an extent, we'll talk ourselves into a recession. Well, we've got to talk ourselves out of recession as well. That sounds a very naive, simplistic view, but I think that there's a certain amount of truth in that. So that's where I've come to. To come back to the idea of positive deviancy and the superhumanisms, and yes, I'm a great comic. I love comics and the way they're drawn, although I can't draw myself. It's really about behavioural, social and organisational change, led by people like probably the people listening to this, the people who've got a different view on how to do things, the thought leaders of the world. It's singularly suited to wicked problems. It's singularly suited to addressing frame-breaking change. And change is going to deepen over the next 12, 18 months if we don't act. And worldwide, I think we do need. And it's a question of how you collectively break through a difficult problem that a particular community has.
Can I just comment on something there? And I think it's more than acting. It's about what form, what style,
Yes.
what element of action you choose to implement. Because, you know, we can all, every day, we can either be very intentional in what we want to go to create our world and our life to be like, or we can be these zombies on default. Either way, we're acting, but one action is creating one outcome, whereas the other action is creating a very different outcome.
Purposeful is what you're talking about.
Purposeful is the word I'm after. Yeah.
That's what we need to be. And I might skip over a couple of slides because time is passing on quite quickly, but I'll just say, this is our time. This is the time when the wise need to lead, I think. And the idea of positive deviancy, the idea of breaking things positively, is really about just getting excellence, getting really good, workable, pragmatic ideas into place that address some fairly major problems. The other side of positive action like this is its health benefits. If you go away and have a look at Cameron's book, he summarised them beautifully. There are so many positive health effects that are connected to positive thinking and positive actions and positive words. It sounds a bit naive, but forgive the expression if there's any Californians listening, it sounds a bit Californian, but but nevertheless it is. And Cameron says it's all about being heliotropic is the word that he uses. And that the idea is if you move towards positive energy, you'll get benefits. It brings more life. And if you get away from negative energy, and that's, I'll be quite honest, I got very down at the beginning of this whole thing, and I thought, what are we gonna do? And I was a bit like, there's a very old British comedy called Dad's Army, and there's a character in that called Private Fraser, who thinks that we're all doomed. We're not. Some of us have got some issues that we're going to have to help with, yes, but I think we've really got to move. We've got to move forward, and we have to be positive, and that's the attitude that I've really now adopted. Kim,
just so that you're aware, just for 2 seconds, people are saying in the chat, great, you are definitely helping, Clive, very interesting and aligned with my mission, and that they love your graphics. So there's some feedback.
Very good, thank you. Kim Cameron, he's a great guy. I met him very briefly once at a conference a long time ago. Very, very capable scholar. Positive leaders enable extraordinary performance by associating the work to be done with positive meaning. Going back to what you just said, purposefulness. Is it purposeful? I'm not just talking about headless chicken syndrome, rushing off and solving everything. What's the purpose? What is it that we want to do? I'm going to actually just skip through a slide because time is passing. Oops.
Yes, time is passing very rapidly.
Just very briefly, what that is about is that extraordinary change requires extraordinary action. So if you wanted a symbol for a superhero at the moment, I think that's the one. It's about being extraordinary. Because what it comes to is we're trying to construct and create solutions to things from a different range of disciplines, a diverse range of disciplines and best practice. People might have noticed that my sources there included things from all over the place. So Gunter Paul is actually a physicist. Herbert Simon was an economist and computer scientist, organisation studies. There's so many different influences on him, medics, people like that. So on the surface, what I'm talking about, it's got the feel of a counterculture. But then you're back to a problem with words again, and people get too obsessed with words. This is different because it doesn't accept making do as a solution. What it says is, if you change what you do, you're going to change what you get. That sounds very trite, but it's true nevertheless. If we always do what we've always done, at the moment, we're not going to get anything in some cases. it is very much, we've got to move forward. There's three things to do while we're just listening. Time for thunks, as somebody I spoke to said. This is when things drop. And that is, you've got to think about your own agenda for the next 4 hours, the next 8 hours, 24, 48 hours. Think about solutions in your community, your practice, your business. And if you're in a team, get the team together and talk to them. I'm sure a lot of the people who I know who I work with who are possibly listening at the moment typically will do that. But you ask your team how they're going and what they're doing. But don't forget to ask yourself how you're traveling. And earlier on, you asked me, what's the weather like here? The weather here today in Sydney is tremendous, beautiful sunny day. I'm going to get out for a walk. Don't forget your own health because that's a big thing.
So can you just clarify what a thunk is?
What a thunk is? A thunk is a particular bias in the way that you think about things. If you remind me, I'll put the reference up to that afterwards. And that was from some work that I did with Thought Leaders Business School about 12 weeks ago now, with some original thinking about thinking styles. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And I can put the reference up. If you remind me, I'll send it and you can transmit it to everybody.
Sure.
That's what a thunk is. It's a particular way of thinking. And what I wanted to say, one more thing was, Zig Ziglar, the sales guru, is that positive thinking will let you do everything better than negative thinking will, because it puts the positive spin on it. So, positive deviancy, very quickly, I've talked quite a lot about it. Original formulation by Jerry Sterning, Monique Sterning, was about helping communities to solve their own public health problems, particularly around nutrition. They did a lot of work in Vietnam. But it's been applied in infection control, primary care, wider public health, child protection, domestic violence, which I'll mention a little bit later on, education. It's also found its way into architecture, and it's found its way into business through the positive leadership movement. What are its characteristics? The characteristics are here. In the individual, it's about getting into flow and having vitality. And in organizations, it's about, I'll sum that whole screen up there by saying organizational excellence. So very high quality, very good work, generous in profitability and sharing and in dealing with relationships. What does it look like? And I'm not going to go into this in great detail, and you can actually look this up. I can say that if you type positive deviancy, you'll get this chart, you'll find this chart. It's, you invite people to change, or people invite you to lead a change in terms of a community. The community itself defines the problem. And this is classic design thinking. When you do design thinking, you go and ask the community what they think. And that's how you get a better solution, because they're already buying into it. In positive deviancy, you find the original thinkers, the people who've got a solution that works or have experienced the problem that you're trying to solve. They will give you their views on what has happened. What you will get out of that largely is uncommon practices or behaviors. They're not commonly, they might be common within the community, but they're not commonly known outside. That enables the design of a program. Again, we're using design thinking here, which you then monitor and evaluate. Then the trick is scaling up. And the trick to scaling up is to actually use these people here to help you to design the scaling. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in just a moment. Now, a very early example of positive deviancy. Now, just set aside any prejudice that you have about defence spending just for a moment. It's the concept, not the product that I'm interested in.
I like that disclaimer.
This is a Lockheed XP-80, which was built in late 1943 as a response to the German jet fighter threat. Germans had created a Messerschmitt jet, which was causing havoc. So Lockheed came up with this idea. Now, this is important. This was built, designed and built by a guy called Kelly Johnson and his Skunk Works team in 143 days. 143 days. So what? Well, my dad was an aircraft design engineer, and he worked on projects similar to this that ran for years. The creation of the Airbus took decades, okay? So 143 days is absolutely astonishing. They were actually 7 days ahead of schedule. They were given 150 days, they did in 143. This is what happens when you get bureaucracy out of the way, when you give people autonomy. And as Alicia Mackay would say, this is what happens. This is when you give people the power to, excuse me, get shit done. Okay? It is what it is. They follow this up with other things as well. So as I say, just say, the question that comes out of this, you know, is who's your favourite deviant? My favourite deviant is a famous one called Albert Einstein. And what he said was the person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The person who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one has ever been before. A slightly different example, and on the theme of...
sorry, I'm just laughing because AJ's just put in the chat box that I'm her favourite deviant.
It's a compliment.
Thanks, AJ.
Now, here's an example. My favourite superheroes here, and yes, I still do watch cartoons, and I was watching a manga the other night, which was very interesting. This is about leading positive deviancy because it's tough. So leading these sort of events is difficult because it's complicated, and this is Pixar. And if you've not read Ed Catmull's book, Do. I can't remember the title of it. I can let you know that afterwards. Because what they say, Pixar as a company, which has produced some tremendous films over the years, Toy Story, The Untouchables and so on, their principles are power goes to the creative community in Pixar. It's a peer culture. Everybody is free to communicate with anyone. It's got to be safe to offer ideas, however crazy they actually are. But the one I love most of all as a long-time professor of management and business is that managers need to learn that it's okay to walk into a meeting and be surprised. One of the worst things I think that I hear managers say is, I don't like surprises. Please don't say that. If you've got a surprise, it means it's either an opportunity or you go and find a solution. It doesn't mean you should just do that. And the other thing that Pixar does, they stay very close to the academic community, so they get innovations very quickly. So that's why Pixar, go and have a look at the example of Ed Catmull's book. That will give you some more insights onto that.
For everyone, AJ's just put that link into the chat box too.
Oh, thank you, AJ. Another interesting thinker. This I picked up. There is a fantastic documentary series on Netflix at the moment on design. It's absolutely brilliant. If you get the opportunity to go and watch it, I've picked up a couple of examples that I'm using here from that series. This is Fiat Chrysler Automotive, and their global design chief is a guy called Ralph Gillis. Chrysler is always in a tough position. It's always been fighting for market share, and over the years I've watched it go through crisis and crisis and crisis. It's nearly folded on many occasions, but it's still there. Why is that? It's because they come up with neat designs and innovations of them. The guy who runs this is a guy called Ralph Gillis, and he's responsible for design in some of the most famous brands in the world. Alfa Romeo, anybody? Yes, he works with Italian designers. This is a Canadian designer, educated in America. He works with Maserati. He works with Fiat. Let's gloss over that one. Sorry, any Fiat owners. But it's a fascinating approach that he takes to making sure design is current. If you watch him, if you watch that documentary, he looks for positive deviancy in ideas. He loves mavericks, but there's this calm transcendence quality about the man. He's generous, he's vital, he's clearly in control. He waits for people to solve problems before gently stepping in to offer advice. So he's looking for perfection, in automotive perfection, loves excellence, but he stands back appropriately, especially with the guys in the Italian designers, less so Lancia, but Maserati and Alfa Romeo, and Abarth is another famous make. So,
what's the name of the documentary that you're talking about?
It is called Design, I think. I can find that out. I'll recall it afterwards. It's on Netflix. It's on design. The question that comes out of this in terms of looking after deviancy is that if you're in a leadership space, how much space do you give the team? Is it enough? Are you developing leaders who can replace you? Are you developing people who can take pressure off you? I'll move through this next one quite quickly. This is the Bjarke Ingels group, which is an architecture group that operates worldwide. They were doing fabulous work on the New York riverfront development. This is one of their designs. The short version of what they do is that they don't accept that you have residential development, business development, public development, that you don't have retail, they're all separated. They blend things together and get the best designs possible. And this is one of their designs that's done exactly that. They've got another design where they built the entire of a housing development on top of a car park. And for me, go and have a look at this guy's website. It is so refreshing when you sit in one of these boxes, which I do, which is where we happen to live, that we're building all around Sydney at the moment. This is much more inspiring, but it's based on community consultation and divergent thinking. That's the point. That's the way that Big operates. This is another social and very important example. And this is, the woman here is called Ulsi Jamsran. I hope I've pronounced her name correctly. She works for the UN in Moldova. She's from Mongolia originally. Her brilliant step was she learned about positive deviancy from Monique Sterling through somebody else and realized that development actors were able to use survivors of gender-based violence, of domestic violence, to actually help other people, other victims of that. So they've actually deployed this. You can go and look this up. I got this from the web. I was fascinated to see this. So that women came forward and started to talk with survivors and began to leverage solutions for survivors. So much so that the need for shelters fell by 30% because of the work of the survivors as, forgive the expression, positive deviants, because fewer women needed to be placed in shelters because they spoke up early, because they were able to vocalize what had happened to them to people who understood it. And it's an absolutely brilliant use of, and this is what PD was originally developed for, and long may it continue. I'd urge you to go and have a look at that, anybody who's interested in that. I'm conscious of time, which is why I'm moving things quite quickly.
Great. Yeah, you've got a couple more minutes, and then what we'll do is take questions. So anyone who is listening to Clive, just to wrap up his talk, any questions that you might have for him, please go ahead and drop them down in the Q&A chat box or on the Facebook live stream, and we can answer those questions before we wrap up. Thanks, Clive.
So one of the other things that comes out of Seidman and Macaulay's work, which was on accelerating change in business, is the benefits of what they call the secret sauce. And any thought leaders business school will know this, because somebody did a tremendous webinar on this a few weeks back. The best performers in organisations are usually deviant in some form or another, because they're always looking to break the rules in a lot of cases. They do or have something that's special. And what Macaulay and Seidman are saying is, can you explore it? Can you exploit it? The best example I know of that at the moment is that one of my colleagues with the institute that I help to run is positively deviant. He is not interested in working with informalisms. He's got a unique way of working to develop online education, which is what we do. That's our specialism, is higher education online. And he produces the most functional instructional design that I've ever seen in 30 years of doing this. So he just has a very different approach. I am trying to capture his secret sauce, for want of a better expression, but it's extremely difficult to do that, and we end up with templates. But what you get is you get a reduction in time, and you get an increase in usage, in positive response to usage. So just to finish off, where are the superhumans? Well, they're actually all around us. They're with us now. It's how we say yes to the mess that we're in, to quote another of my favourite books by Frank Barrett. How do we let them take the lead? How do we support them? And if it's us, if we're the deviant, how do we take the lead? Somebody asked that earlier. And the answer is you just keep pushing. The worst thing I've heard during this whole mess was a friend's manager demanding that my friend, if she's working at home, she's got to tell her manager what time she starts work and what time she finishes. And she's got to have a detailed account of what she's done during the day. No interest at all in outputs. So if we want to let the superhumans loose, there are some amongst us who've got to learn to trust and lose insecurity. The superhumans are all around us. When you've finished here, set your agenda, get yourself sorted out, but look for novel solutions to a constraint that you might be operating under. How much do you celebrate the novel? Encourage it. That's the most important thing. And Richard Pasquale, one of the guys who wrote the original text on positive deviance with the Sternins, says that leadership is making happen what wouldn't happen anyway. And this always entails working at the edge of what is acceptable. And as another friend of mine pointed out, most innovative companies, or a lot of innovative companies, started out by doing something that was illegal or on the edge of legality. And so that's the idea of the deviance. We're trying to do some good by actually changing the rules of the game or changing something that's gone on. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Fantastic, Clive. There's an awful lot of wows, people loving the term thunking. And just a point of clarification, the Netflix show, is it called The Art of Design? Is that the right one?
That's the one.
Okay, cool. And we've got a question from someone that I'd like you to be able to address before we wrap up. And this is the question. How do healthcare practitioners adapt the information? Actually, can you just unshare your screen, first of all?
Yes, I'm sorry.
So that's back to the two of us. And this is the question. How do healthcare practitioners adapt the information on positive deviance to help shine the light on the complacency in health?
There we go. How's that?
Do you want me to read that again?
Yeah, please do.
How do healthcare practitioners adapt this information on positive deviancy to help healthcare today?
So two things on that. I'd go and get hold of Pasquale Sternin and Sternin's book. That's the first thing to do. It's available on Amazon. It's in Kindle. I've read through it. That they are the two co-authors of that. Sternin and Sternin are healthcare professionals. That they've actually done that. There's a whole series of case histories on how you actually do that. The other thing to say is that I've watched over the last month with fascination is that it's already happening in healthcare. So we're beginning to see people break different ideas and different rules correctly, appropriately, to actually change the way that things are done. So
you got a specific example of that you can
share?
Yeah,
so the example was manufacturing of PPE was very constrained within a few specialist manufacturers here. Somebody turned around and said, well, actually, I do 3D printing of plastics. I can actually manufacture PPE for people. So it's just a question of taking what already exists and just twisting it slightly to actually look at how things work. I think the thing that the other thing, here's another example in the healthcare. What they've said is fourth-year medical students, okay, we can use them to substitute for doctors in call centers, for example, to do telehealth. So it's not necessarily making a radical, it's not about disruptive innovation, it's about incremental innovation as well. So I'm not just talking about whole scale change, I'm talking about just gentle little tweaks in the way that we do things.
Yeah, and someone in the chat's giving the example of Dyson making ventilators and fashion brands doing the face masks. Yeah. Okay, cool. Another question. How do you keep your creative juices flowing? Any strategies?
Me, everybody's different. It depends how you learn. My background is in education and learning, of course. We all learn differently. Some psychologists don't like this idea, but I like the idea of learning styles or learning preferences in this case. Visual, auditory, reading, or kinesthetic. In other words, watching, listening, reading and writing or doing. I'm very strongly towards reading. I read a lot. I read far more than, without being funny, I read far more than some people. Other people prefer to watch documentaries. That's why I was watching that design documentary the other night. And I just get the ideas and I sketch them out. So I'm sure some of our listeners are in what Thought Leaders Business School, and I write the ideas down. You know, I'm very old-fashioned. I have a notebook, and I just write ideas down all the time, and I draw pictures. And in drawing pictures, I get different ideas, and I pull different ideas together. So it's read, listen, is the advice I give. And always get different points of view. So I might not agree with some, so for example, I don't particularly like Jordan Peterson's politics. He's the Canadian professor who's created a bit of a stir in society. But I go and read his books because he gives me an alternative point of view. He makes me question my own thinking. Now, I might not agree with what he says, but it gives me a different perspective from what he is. So that's what I look for, different points of view, reading lots of different books, lots of different, and also listening to different sorts of music, although jazz is predominantly what I listen to.
And I think that's so important, because if you maintain the openness of spirit and heart and mind to embrace a whole range of what people are saying, then you're not closing yourself off all the time. And I think it's that habit that we can have as humans of closing ourselves off and saying no, and not being willing to, just going, oh, I don't believe in that shit, so I'm not going to find out about it. Well, how about you find out about it? You might still not believe it at the end, but at least you've found out about what it is that you don't believe instead of making this kind of dramatic cut-off point that many of us seem to do.
I mean, the website I was looking at when we were talking about growth is from quite a right-wing think tank, but they've got some really good points. Now, how they wanted to do it was not exactly how I would think we would want to do it, but their major point was that we need to close the gap. Manufacturing is what drives any economy. Let's be really clear about it. Economies are driven by manufacturing, economic growth, and service always lags, and that's based on my watching it for 30 years. Now, they've got different ideas about how you can close the gap between manufacturing and service. I think there are different ways to do that, but their point was, for me, was quite profound, that you've got to close the gap. How they want to do it is different to the way that I would want to do it.
Yeah.
It was a different point of view from the one that I would normally have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what we want to bring out here is the healthful approach involved in that openness. Now, someone just wants to clarify regarding Pascal's book. Is it called The Power of Positive Deviance, How Unlikely Innovators Solve the World Toughest Problem?
That is precisely the book. Yes.
Okay, yes, so that is the book. Stephen Berkeley, I believe, was the person who asked that. And people are saying, they're just adding comments to what you're saying about capturing your ideas. And I know certainly from my point of view, I'm a real idea capturer, and I'll write everything down. It might be just 2 words, but what that allows me to do is anytime I want to write an article or write a blog or do a live stream, I've got this permanent amount of content just sitting there. I don't even have to think about what to speak about. I can just go and read the 1 word. That gives me a blog that I need for the newspaper or whatever.
I capture IP snapshots using a particular method, and I've got over 1,000 of those IP snapshots. So the way that this talk was put together was that I just picked a whole load of snapshots and pulled them together and created some new ones as well.
So the bit I just want to add in regards to the person who asked the question about creativity is it's not just input, it's output. And that's really, really key, because what a lot of people will do, they'll do the input and they'll see and they'll experience and whatever, but they don't do the output. They don't start messaging. And it's not until you really start messaging and creating the output that you really get that flow through of ideas and conversations, and also keeps you sane to get it out of your head.
Absolutely.
Because, for those of us who are positive deviants, I will take that title nicely. Thanks, AJ. We can have lots of stuff going on inside here. So you have to be able to purge and get it out as well. So we are near time, so I'm going to wrap it up. But is there any last words of wisdom that you would like to share with the group, Clive, before we finish off?
I it, there's an old cliche which is illegitimus non carborundum, which is don't let the bastards grind you down. The point being that it is, and I know I suffer from depression. What we must not do is to allow this to get on top of us, and being positively deviant, looking for fresh solutions to wicked problems is a great way to pull yourself forward, to pull other people forward. And it's how we're going to rebuild society, it's how we're going to rebuild economy, is by looking for solutions to those wicked problems. And it's up to us as leaders to actually do that. And so that's what I urge people to do.
Absolutely. And what a great way to wrap up. And a massive thank you to everyone who's been listening, to Michelle, to AJ, to Nosh, to Mahoob. And I just want to read out Mahoob's statement because I think that's the perfect way to end. And he's just said, "Thank you very much, Clive. It moves me further toward my mission with positive determination."
Precisely.
So, a well-spent morning was had by all. Thank you so much, and thanks for all your references to lots of reading material, etc. And we can liaise with you as to how to go about dropping all those references straight into the Superhuman Summit group. So appreciate your time and energy. For those of you wanting to know what's up next, we have Jenny Lee, and she's coming on at 1 o'clock. So it gives you time to go and do whatever you need for a few hours time, come back. And she's talking about upgrading your life and the next step of human evolution. And she's a breathwork practitioner. So she's going to be talking a lot about how to utilize breathwork as an entry point into the quantum. So come on and hear her at 1 o'clock. And thanks again. Appreciate your time, Clive.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Bye, everybody.
Bye.